Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the NATO summit that has just ended in Vilnius, Lithuania. Vilnius is a very beautiful European city in the Baltics, and it is the capital of Lithuania, and the NATO summit just ended there. I want to summarize for you what took place there. If you ask me to say it in 3 sentences, I would say NATO said yes to Sweden, no to Ukraine, and it said good boy to Turkey. But before I summarize and identify what really came out of Vilnius, please subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, ring the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your friends and colleagues who are interested in geopolitics, and especially the Russia-Ukraine war. So this is what happened. Going in to NATO, there were some challenges that President Joe Biden faced. Turkey was resisting Sweden's application to full membership in NATO. And there were lots of negotiations that have been going on for over a year, and there was still fear that Turkey would say no to NATO's inclusion, Sweden's inclusion in NATO. There was also a lot of talk about offering a full membership to Ukraine. There was a lot of pressure from Ukrainian President Zelensky and his allies in Europe saying, what is the point of having NATO if you cannot protect countries like Ukraine? And so Ukraine, the best way to protect Ukraine is to extend full membership to Ukraine. But NATO said no to it. And then, of course, an interesting question that arises is the fact that Turkey reversed its position on Sweden and said yes to Sweden's membership. So what did Turkey get for saying yes to Sweden's membership? So starting with the first issue. Now, nearly all international events where Western countries have some influence, regardless of what their orientation, what their regional focus, they all become about Ukraine. So if you look at the foreign ministers meeting of G20 in India, it became all about Ukraine, even though India had other issues as chairman of G20, as president of G20 on the agenda. It all became about Ukraine and condemning Russia. And the same thing happened with G7 in Hiroshima. And of course, NATO is about Ukraine these days. So most of the discussion was about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and West's response to that. So the first issue was the issue of Ukraine's membership into NATO. What is interesting is that the most striking thing that came out, ultimately Ukraine was not offered even a direct pathway to how it could become a membership, except that it will happen once the war ends. So it is an incentive for Putin to never end this war. He could continue the war if he wants to prevent Ukraine from becoming a member of NATO until the consensus in Europe breaks down and there is a change in attitude in Washington, D.C. So if Russia can keep up this war until then it's quite possible Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. And the second thing that has come out is clearly that NATO is divided, because if NATO was not divided, then even though we can understand not offering full membership into NATO to Ukraine because it is at war with Russia, would immediately put NATO at war with Russia, a nuclear power. And one of President Biden's goals, besides protecting Ukraine, was to ensure that the West, especially the United States, does not enter into a war with a nuclear power like Russia. He fears an escalation to either use of nuclear weapons or something like a world war if it became a Russia versus the United States conflict. So while those goals are aware, it does appear that they could not even offer guarantees that they would support Ukraine as NATO. And so that guarantee to support Ukraine came from G7 countries and not from all of NATO countries. So it clearly shows that there is some dissent inside NATO, and some countries are unwilling to bring NATO into bring Ukraine into NATO. And so it fell upon G7 to offer Ukraine something, since NATO has said no to membership now. And they said, look, we're going to provide funds, we're going to provide weapons till as long as you fight. And that guarantee has come from G7 countries. G7 countries are the richest democracies in the world: the United States, Great Britain, Canada, France, Germany, and Japan, and Italy. So these are the 7 countries which have now guaranteed continuous support to Ukraine. So the first thing that comes out is that Ukraine is not going to become a member of NATO at the moment. Number 2, it also shows that there is already some kind of division inside NATO on the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war. There are also tactical, I mean, this is a strategic level disagreement, but there is also tactical level disagreements that are going on with for example, on the issue of giving Ukrainians F-16s and training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16s. It appears that the earliest that the Ukrainians can get F-16s is somewhere around March or April in 2024. So we are assuming the war will continue for another 8 months at least. The United States is also kind of peeved, at least from a discussion on France 24, I gathered that the British, who do not have F-16s, are somehow training Ukrainian pilots on how to fly F-16s without the agreement and okay from the United States. So the US is quite upset. The US feels that F-16s are very expensive. They have very little tactical advantage in the nature of the war that is going. They're not going to really be of any significant use. Plus, they will be quite vulnerable in the kind of battles that are taking place inside Ukraine at the moment. And therefore, the United States feels that the resources which have been allocated for the war in Ukraine are better used with other equipment, more damaging, the ones that can be very dangerous for civilians, etc. Something which is really a horrible kind of a weapon that even 100 countries have banned, called the cluster munitions. So the United States feels the cluster munitions are better suited for the war in Ukraine right now than F-16s, which probably will be shot down by Russian S-400s and S-500s. Anyways, it was not a good moment for the United States, not the no part from F-16s, the yes part on cluster munitions. I think it's going to come up in elections, Mr. Biden's. And the justification is that we are out of ammunition. Well, the same justification can be used for using tactical nuclear weapons. We are running out of ammunition. We can't stop fighting. So let's use nukes, let's use chemical weapons, let's use biological weapons like we are using cluster weapons. As you can see, I'm not very happy with that decision anyway. So that is as far as the Ukrainian issue is concerned. It is interesting. I'm interested in knowing as to what extent the Ukrainian issue would dominate the G20 heads of states summit in September in India. And will Zelensky come to India? And if he comes, then all of whatever India's agenda is for global south, etc., will all disappear. It will be all about Ukraine. Anyway, so the second issue is Sweden. Sweden has now is very well on its path to becoming a member of NATO after staying out of it for nearly 7 decades. And this is one of the failures of Russian war and one of the achievements of Biden, apparently. The foreign policy achievement is Sweden has joined NATO, and apparently it is going to come in handy in elections. I don't know why Americans would vote for Biden because Sweden joined NATO, but at least some of the foreign policy experts in Washington seem to think this is a good campaign issue for Biden, that Sweden is like Finland. Basically, NATO expansion is good for America. But it's not yet done. Hungary has yet to give its yes. Turkey, which was the main stumbling block, has said yes. But what Turkey has really done is said that it's going to forward this to the Turkish parliament. The president approves it, but it's quite possible that the Turkish parliament could say no, but we'll see what happens. The assumption is that if President Erdogan says yes, then the Turkish parliament will also say yes. Sweden is a very small country, but also a very powerful country. It manufactures advanced fighter jets. It is a major exporter of weapons, a country with feminist foreign policy and very aggressive marketing of deadly weapons worldwide. So Sweden is a very interesting country, and definitely its inclusion into NATO does Sweden's national security interests, and so good for it. As far as Turkey is concerned, until 2 days before that, it was clear that Turkey was not going to say yes, and some of the conditions that President Erdogan, one of them presented were interesting. One of them was that Turkey should be allowed to join the European Union, and then Turkey would allow Sweden to join NATO. It kind of caught a lot of people by surprise. I mean, come on, who wants Turkey in Europe? I don't think any European country wants Turkey in Europe. They already think Turkey is a headache in NATO. There are lots of discussions in the United States on how to, is there a pathway to removing Turkey from NATO? But nevertheless, Turkey gained some brownie points. Biden congratulated Erdogan, was grateful that he has said yes to to Sweden's membership in NATO. But it is quite possible that behind the scenes, some of the more concrete things that Turkey wanted is now being made available, which is Turkey wants to modernize its air force and wants upgraded F-16s now that it is outside the F-35. Turkey purchased S-400 missiles from Russia, which has really upset the United States, and therefore Turkey, which was initially part of the manufacturing project of F-35s, the most advanced fighters in the world. Turkey is now out of F-35s, but yet it still hopes to get more advanced and modernized versions of F-16s. And it is quite possible that President Biden has promised him that he will get that. Erdogan also talked about visa-free travel for Turks to the European Union, and perhaps the reopening of Turkey's negotiation with EU for joining EU. But it's not very clear that what he really got. Even from the meeting that there was meetings on the sidelines between President Biden and Recep Erdogan, the president of Turkey. But when I read the State Department's readout on that meeting, there was nothing really concrete that the United States promised. It doesn't really appear as if. So I think the demands about the European Union, etc., are in some way a signal to make the domestic population of Turkey happy with President Erdogan for his demands in exchange for giving a yes to Sweden. Turkey has lately also moved a bit more towards Ukraine, and apparently a phone call recently between President Erdogan and Mr. Putin did not go very well, and so it does appear that Turkey has made more commitments to Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, and is now firmly in the camp of the West with Ukraine against, well, I don't know whether against Russia, but definitely with Ukraine. So it's quite possible that at the moment, Turkey is once again in the good books of Europe and North America. So these are the three things that really came out of the Vilnius summit of NATO. And it remains to be seen how long this war is going to continue and how long it will continue to keep Europe united behind America's leadership. There's no doubt that Joe Biden is the leader of the West on the Ukrainian issue. America is also benefiting significantly from this war. We are the biggest exporter of, I think, oil now to Europe at much higher prices than what Europe was paying in the past. And we are now selling tons and tons of arms to many European countries. Russia's war in Ukraine is putting pressure on all NATO members. Now there are over 30 to raise their defense budgets to up to 2%. And in order to maintain interoperability, they probably will all have to buy most of the advanced weapons from the United States. So in many ways, the war in Ukraine is kind of a bonanza geopolitically to enhance US leadership over Europe, underscore Europe's dependence on the United States for its security, and also financial bonanza for the United States oil companies, as well as the military industrial complex. So I hope you found this discussion interesting and illuminating, if not just informative. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, share it with your friends and your colleagues, but also don't forget to ring the bell icon so that you get notifications when I post my next video. If you're wondering why I'm looking a bit so casual, is because, as you know, I'm part of this American Foreign Policy Seminar for 7 weeks that's going on, which is sponsored by the State Department and offered by the University of Delaware. And so I'm traveling with scholars from 16 countries. Today I'm in Connecticut. Tomorrow we will be visiting the Connecticut College doing a war game, I think, a simulation. After that, we plan to go to Yale's Grand Strategy program, and then I'll be back in DC, in Delaware over the weekend. And perhaps then my next video will be done on Sunday once I'm back in Delaware. So take care and be nice and be happy and be safe. Until next time, this is Muqtedar Khan.